Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. The Handmaid's Tale is a TV show based on the famous cautionary book of the same name by Margaret Atwood. It's all about a nasty bad future where fertile women are kept as chattel and everyone else is kinda nuts. Episode 4, Nolite te bastardis Carborundum, Carborundum picks up just her fortnight after the last episode ended, and Offred's still confined to her bedroom, and she's starting to go a wee bit stir crazy, and she's pacing all about and lying in the cupboard at night, and there she spots a bit of Latin graffiti carved in the wood, and it says, Nolite te bastardes Carborundum. Isn't Latin wonderful? Anyway, Martha Rita finds her lying on the floor like that, and she gets a nasty fright, and she isn't reassured, when she says that she just fainted, and then later mentions it to Mrs. Commander, who concedes that, maybe a visit to the doctor's a good idea, because, it's ceremony night that night, but then she makes sure that she can't talk to anyone, not even Nick, the driver. And while she's there, the doctor gets a little bit conspiratorial. He's talking about Commander Shakespeare maybe being sterile, which is an absolute big no-no. I mean, it's okay for the women to be sterile, but you can't say the men are because, Gilead just doesn't believe in that. But anyway, he offers to impregnate her himself. Aye, okay pal, how about no? On the way home, June starts to totally rage about things, and she boots the absolute living heck out of the car, like getting it all out of her system a bit, and then when she gets back, she ends up apologising and pretty much all but begs just to be let out of the room, and Mrs. C is like, no hen, go back to the room. And so she goes back, and she looks at the Latin words, and reminisces about back in the olden days when her and Moira used to scratch graffiti at Handmaid school. And then after finding out that they were going to be basically ritually raped every single month until they have babies for powerful men, they decide to hatch an escape plan. And so they end up kidnapping and robbing an ant's outfit, and then they escape, and Moira being like the ant, and Offred being like the handmaid. And they actually managed to make it pretty far across town. I mean, which is no joke, because ever since it turned into the Republic of Gilead, there's no street signs anymore, so it's really difficult for them to figure out where they're going. But finally they get to the subway, and they might be able to make their way from there to Boston, from wherever it is that they are. And then apparently Moira knows about a safe house that's somewhere in Boston, so she goes to ask for directions from people, and while she's doing that, June gets approached by a guard, and since she doesn't actually have any papers or any kind of ID, they end up hauling her back, and Moira can only look on in sadness, and then, get the hell out of Dodge. But June, she just silently takes it because, she sacrifices herself so that Moira can get away, and that sacrifice doesn't just mean her loss of freedom, because when she gets back, Aunt Lydia and, the other aunt who they tied up end up whipping her feet with steel rods from trying to escape. And back in the present, Commander Shakespeare arrives at the ceremony early, and he asks Offred for a Scrabble rematch that night, and she gets kind of flustered, and then everyone else comes in, but when it comes to that crucial moment, he can't get himself up, and he leaves the room, followed by Mrs. Commander. And out in the bathroom, she tries to be caring and loving and help him to get his wee commander to stand at attention, but he's just not having it, and he goes away. So it's back to the bedroom for Offred, until time for that Scrabble date. And while she's down there, a challenge over a word leads her to spotting a Latin book on the shelf, and she ends up asking about the Latin phrase from the wall, and it turns out that it's actually something he came up with as a kid. It's actually really bad Latin, and he wrote it inside the book's inside cover, and it translates pretty much as something along the lines of, don't let the bastards grind you down, and he knows that the only person who she could have heard it from is the previous Offred. So she asks about her, and it turns out that old Offred killed herself, obviously hating the handmaid existence, and that's clearly affected the commander and upset him, because she ends up playing on this and manages to convince him that it's so hard her being locked in the room, and then boom, that's her out. She's out in the town, out there with the rest of her squad, all new and empowered and with a new resolve to survive and to win. And as Offred says herself,
Nolite de bastardes Carborundum, bitches.
So what did I think? Well, I thought this week was really interesting. I mean, if a wee bit short on actual technical present day story, although what we got was really intriguing and then quite tense at times, especially during the escape sequence. I mean, we're actually beginning to see that there's a building resentment up inside Offred. I mean, she's pretty near her breaking point. This has really pushed her to her lowest ebb, and boom, like a phoenix, she gets reborn at the end, stronger and angrier and more enthusiastic about life and things and getting out of this situation. I mean, I really love that final bitches at the end. I mean, that certifies with us that from here on out, she's committed to surviving. And I liked how there's little bits of like work and sly stuff surrounding the previous Offred. Like, how Rita had that bit of panic when she found Offred lying there. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was her who actually found the previous Offred as well. Or maybe it was the last Martha. And maybe she got exiled or punished for that. Because I'm sure if June killed herself, it's not the commander or his wife that would have got the blame. It would have been Rita or Nick. That's how it works. And I also like that this week tried something really new by giving us a scene where Offred wasn't present. I mean, that's a really big change in TV and filmmaking terms, because like a narrative shift like that really means something in the story, because the book only ever told the reader what we saw and heard and knew that came from June. But now we're seeing like little secret moments with Mr. and Mrs. Commander. But more on that later, because there were a couple of things that bugged me this week. First off, I'd say that I kind of feel like the show might have shot itself in foot just a wee bit with like the Handmaid school stuff, since we, the audience, already know about the ceremony because it's been in the show since episode 1, but we're only now seeing them find out that kind of thing. And it's kind of after a hasty scene where Moira jokes almost about turkey basters and being impregnated or something using that kind of means, but they never really play out the absolute horror, because I mean, you think they would, and I know that they don't want to make the show unwatchably rough for people, but seriously, it's horrific. The concept itself is really horrific. And the extent that we see it is Moira asks one question and get like your foot kicked a wee bit, and then a few funny looks between few people. I don't know, I just felt like there should have been more to that. It felt like an after the fact, oh, we kind of have to show the scene where they find this out. But they didn't really want to try to make it have as much impact as it could have done. Also, on a vaguely related note, every man in this show is a rapist, honestly, or a wannabe rapist, or a complicit rapist. Well, I mean, I suppose everybody in the show is a complicit rapist, because, I mean, in this future, if you're not actually a handmaid yourself, and even then, maybe some of the crazier true believer ones are a wee bit. Other than that, everybody else in the show is like a willing participant in this society to some extent, and knows what happens. It's not even like, people are unaware. But here, when we see a doctor, and for one little moment it seems like he might be an ally, but oh no, he just wants to get his end away with her and maybe have his own wee baby be born, which is something else that would be interesting if the show gets into later, because I mean, other stories and other things have actually tried to go into this idea of what would it mean if suddenly everyone was sterile. What the ability to actually have your own line continue would surely become really important to people. But I mean, that's kind of like adding in a buy-in to the show. And what I mean about that is, everything you watch has what I like to call a buy-in. Like in a casino, you have to be willing to put in an amount of money in order to actually use the casino. And in a show or a book or a movie or whatever, you have to buy into this concept. And that involves meeting the show at a certain point and accepting what it's going to do. And the buy-in for Handmaid's Tale is that you've got to accept that in something like 5 to 10 years, American society went from normal to like a babyless weird craziness, and then turned into the Republic of Gilead in a few months. And that's all well and cool, but as I've said in the previous reviews, I've got issues with the way it's being spun out to the audience. But I'm willing to wait and see if they manage to make it make sense. But here we are, episode 4, and it still doesn't. Unfortunately, the side effect of that is that we have to believe that all of these people, especially the ones in power, actually think this society is a good idea. I mean, people like Lydia, and to some extent the commander, and that wee daft handmaid from the other week who thought everything was just lovely and sweet and such a lark. Interestingly, I'd actually like to see in the show what these people think, because it's not at all hard to understand Offred's situation, because she's like the normal viewer going into this situation, and like we're seeing the horror through her eyes. But I want to know what's going on in the head of the entrenched folk, the folk that actually seem to go along with this, because that's the mindset that to me seems the baffling one that I want to understand so that I can make sense of how this world exists. And this week did give a tiny wee glimpse into that, that little scene with Fred and Serena on their own. But we still really aren't getting to understand and sympathise with these people. And yes, I mean sympathise, because sympathy with a villain is what makes a good story, because it makes their bad actions seem even worse, because we can kind of on some level understand in a twisted way what that means. I mean, look, just think about Thanos in the Avengers movie, that film that made absolute billions. I mean, the whole point about that is the whole story is about understanding and to some extent kind of sympathising with this guy, even though he has an absolutely insane thing in his mind and plans to do horrible things that will wipe out, well, literally half the universe. On another hand, take Walter White from Breaking Bad, which I won't spoil anything about, but I mean, let's be honest, the show's about a teacher who becomes a drug dealer. You've got to sympathise with him on some level, even though he's doing terrible things.
You're goddamn right.
But at this point in the show, I kind of want to see more of Fred and Serena's world and that relationship, because that fantasy element of the story really comes into world building. I mean, give me an episode from their point of view, or give me an episode from Aunt Lydia's point of view. Do a Game of Thrones and suddenly turn one character that we hate into one we love by showing us the world from their point of view and make the world more complicated and more interesting. Anyway, I actually really didn't have any particular quibbles with this week's episode in particular. It was all more the conceptual stuff that's been bugging me, big picture things. Anyway, till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.